The Anchor and the Sand, a sailor's story. The heat in Bahrain doesn't just sit on you, it owns you. It's a thick, salt-crusted weight that makes your lungs feel like they're breathing in steam. I remember stepping off the brow of the USS Fitzgerald that first day, my clothes already starting to cling to my back, looking at the beige horizon and thinking, just 6 more months of this. I was 21, a machinist's mate, third class. My world was defined by the rhythmic thrum of the main engines, the smell of F-76 fuel oil, and the constant metallic symphony of a destroyer at sea. You get used to the isolation out there. You get used to the fact that your entire life is a 500-foot gray steel box. But that afternoon in Manama, I wandered away from the guys. They were heading to the usual American-style bars, but I wanted something quiet. I found it in a small tea house tucked into a limestone alleyway. That's where I met Layla. She was pouring tea for an older man when I walked in. When our eyes met, the world didn't stop. It just finally made sense. She had this quiet strength about her and eyes that looked like they'd seen 1,000 years of history. We spent that first hour talking through a language barrier and a lot of hand gestures. She was a student, helping her uncle with the shop. By the time I had to head back to the pier, I felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. The next 4 months were a blur of underway and in port. Every time we pulled back into Bahrain for a replenishment, I didn't head to the malls. I headed to that alleyway. But when we were at sea, our relationship lived in the paper bridge we built, the letters. In the Navy, you live for mail call. Every time a C-2 Greyhound landed on the carrier nearby and the mail helos buzzed over to our destroyer, my heart would do a somersault. From the Gulf of Oman, Alex to Layla, Layla, we've been dark for 3 days. No lights on deck at night, just the moon. I'm writing this in the machine shop while the main reduction gears are screaming. It's 110 degrees in here, but I'm wearing the scent you gave me on my wrist just so I can breathe something other than oil. I'd trade this entire multi-billion-dollar destroyer for 1 hour on that wooden bench with you. The response, Layla to Alex. Alex, my uncle asks about the quiet American every day. He says the tea tastes better when there is someone there who actually knows how to listen to the silence. I keep your St. Christopher medal under my pillow. Sometimes, when the city is too loud, I hold it and try to hear the ocean you talk about. Don't let the sea keep you. There were blackout periods where we went into high-tension zones. No mail in, no mail out. I wrote to her every night anyway. Ghost letters. I didn't know if she'd ever see. I told her I was scared the months would wash away the memory of my voice. I was fighting the current every day just to get back to her shore. Being a sailor in a foreign port has rules. We had to be careful. We met in secret at public parks, sitting on opposite ends of a bench just to talk without drawing eyes. We realized we were both trapped. I was bound by my contract. She was bound by the expectations of a traditional family. We became each other's escape. The day we were set to leave for the final transit back to the States was the hardest day of my life. 2 weeks before we headed east, we had one last brief stop. I couldn't leave the pier area due to security threats, so she did something incredibly brave. She drove to the gate, past the concrete barriers and the guards with M4s. We stood 50 feet apart, separated by a chain-link fence and a line of armed shore patrol. I couldn't even touch her hand. I took a piece of paper, wrote 3 words in the biggest letters I could, and pressed it against the fence. I am coming. She held up a small notebook. She had written in English, I am ready. Walking back up the brow of the ship felt like walking into a prison. As we pulled out of the harbor, I stood on the fantail in my salt-stained coveralls. I watched the Bahraini skyline shrink until it was just a hazy line on the horizon. My shipmates were cheering, shouting about beer and seeing their families. I just touched a small piece of turquoise she gave me and prayed the engines wouldn't fail. When we finally pulled into San Diego, the piers were lined with welcome home signs. It was beautiful, but I felt like a ghost. People asked, how is the Middle East? And I'd just say, hot. How do you explain to a civilian that you left your soul in a desert? While on deployment, I was able to save about $10,000 due to not partying with my shipmates, but instead spending time with Layla. I didn't buy a truck. I didn't go on a party spree. I spent my entire re-enlistment bonus on a plane ticket and an engagement ring. 3 months after I stepped off that ship, I was back at the airport. No uniform this time. Just a guy with a backpack, a ring, and a promise to keep. People think the military is all about the gear and the mission. For me, it was about a stack of envelopes held together by a rubber band and a girl who proved that the desert can grow the most beautiful things if you're willing to wait for the rain. The flight back felt longer than the entire 6-month deployment. On the ship, you have a job to do. Your mind is occupied by torque specs and fuel levels, but sitting in a cramped middle seat on a commercial airliner, I was a nervous wreck. I kept reaching into my pocket, my thumb tracing the velvet box of the ring, then moving to the small piece of turquoise she'd given me months ago. Coming through customs in Bahrain as a civilian was surreal. The last time I was in this airport, I was in my dress whites, carrying a sea bag, surrounded by 1,000 other sailors. Now I was just Alex. No rank, no ship, no mission, just a man looking for a girl. I didn't tell her exactly when I was arriving. I wanted to see her in our place. I took a taxi straight to the old district. The smell hit me first, the familiar mix of sea salt, roasted coffee, and dust. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might actually give out. I walked down that narrow alleyway, my boots sounding loud against the limestone. I reached the tea house. The wooden latticework was the same. The music drifting out was the same. I stepped inside, and for a second the cool air felt like a benediction. She was there. She was standing behind the counter arranging small glass cups. She looked up when the bell on the door chimed, a polite welcome already forming on her lips. Then she saw me. She didn't scream or run. She just froze. A glass cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor, but neither of us cared. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, reflecting the warm amber light of the shop. I walked across that room in 3 strides. I told you, I whispered, my voice cracking. I told you I was coming back. She finally moved, reaching out to touch my face as if she needed to prove I wasn't another ghost letter or a dream brought on by the heat. Her hands were shaking. You look different without the uniform, she breathed, a small, tearful laugh breaking through. You look like mine. I didn't wait. I didn't care that her uncle was watching from the back room or that the patrons were staring. I dropped to one knee right there on the rug. Layla, I've spent the last 6 months dreaming of this moment. I've crossed oceans and deserts, and I've realized that home isn't a place in Pennsylvania or a ship in the Pacific. Home is wherever you are. Will you marry me? She didn't even let me finish. She pulled me up and kissed me right there in the middle of the tea house. It tasted like mint and home, the mountains of Pennsylvania. It's been 2 years since that day. Sometimes I'm sitting on the porch of our house in the Pennsylvania hills, watching the snowfall, something Layla still finds absolutely magical, and I look at the stack of letters on the coffee table. They're yellowed now, the ink a little faded, but they're the most valuable things we own. People ask us how we made it work, how a kid from the Navy and a girl from the Middle East found a way through the wars, the distance, and the red tape. I usually just look at her and smile. The military taught me how to be a sailor, but Layla taught me how to be a man worth coming home to. We still have that piece of turquoise and my St. Christopher medal. They stay on the mantle, a reminder that no matter how big the ocean is or how wide the desert, an anchor will always find its ground if the heart knows where it belongs.